Hello, hello. Welcome. I am really, really excited to introduce my good friend Anna Tsui and also fellow co-host of the Rooted Revolution Summit. And I wanted to introduce you all Anna Sui. So I'm going to have her come on right now and we can say hi.
Hey,
Hi!
Katie, so nice to see you.
It's
Wow.
great to see you as well.
I think it's so cool.
Oh.
We're just like in opposite sides of the US, but we're connecting. Oh, I see Jenny's here. Hey, Jenny.
Yes, I love it. I love it. There's so much to get into about the Rooted Revolution Summit. But before we do that, will you just tell everyone like a little bit of what you do in case somebody here doesn't know who you are?
Oh, great question, Katie. So I'm Anna Sweet. I wrote that book right there. It's called Shadow Magic, and it's how to turn these like deep parts of us that we sabotage our own success and how to use that as fuel for our growth. And I think it's really what made me just really excited to be part of this rooted revolution too, is like as women, as Asians, as bicultural, tricultural people, and there's a lot of complexity, and how do we make that work for us? And also like this inner trauma, like how do we make that work for us, right? And so that's what I'm about. I feel like we all have access to these great levels of genius and abundance, and I know you know all about that because you help your folks with that. But yeah, that's what I do.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And just a little bit of background. Anna and I actually met in Sicily, of all places.
Yeah, right before the pandemic. Can you believe that?
Right before the pandemic. It was like October of 2019. And we were in Sicily on a trip, on an amazing trip. And Anna's part of the group. And yeah, that's how we met. We didn't, it's so funny and so crazy, like, that we got connected in that way. And, and
Destiny.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And then you and I in the last year like had a conversation around, it was especially around when the whole, you know, thing that happened in Atlanta when those women were killed at the Atlanta spas, and you were speaking out um, about it, and then I was hesitant at first, but then I was like, I need to also talk about this, and you. It was so interesting because first of all, one, you were starting to kind of I mean, call out is not even the right word because you did it in such a graceful, nice way, but you were basically calling out some people who utilize like Asian modalities, such as like yoga and,
Yes.
and, all kinds
Acupuncture,
of things,
Chinese
acupuncture,
medicine.
right? And who are not Asian and also are not giving credit where credit is due. First of all, what kind of forced you to do that at that time? And then we're going to get into like our discussion in terms of like this rooted revolution thing that
Oh,
started.
yeah, Katie, you're taking me back. I just remember that time because it was like, what is going on? And then there was all these Asian hate crimes, which have always happened, but I think it just became very widespread, especially targeting really like older people, like people who couldn't defend themselves. And I wasn't seeing anyone talk about it, especially Asians. And then I was like, wait a second, I know so many, because, like we're both in kind of a health and wellness space. Like I know so many yoga teachers, so many Chinese medicine practitioners, feng shui people who are not Asian, which is fine. They're amazingly gifted and talented, but they didn't say anything. And then I realized that when I asked them and I approached them about it, I was like, "Hey, do you guys know what this is happening?" And they never made the connection. They're like, "Oh, I have a type of privilege where I earn my living from these Asian traditions and modalities, and I, don't have to kind of suffer the consequences or whatever of what's going on. And they just didn't see themselves as people who could even speak up about it. And then when I asked Asian people, I'm like, hey, are you, people who like experience this, right? I'm sure we've all experienced this in life. And, they just felt like a few things, like they just felt like they didn't want to draw attention to it, which is so Asian. And then they didn't want to speak up about it because it's like, then people would actually have to see that, they stood for something, or they didn't want to see themselves as like being complaining or whatever. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
guys, this is the whole problem. This is a visibility problem, right? But I had to be
Mm-hmm.
honest, like like you, I naturally didn't want to speak up about it until I realized the gravity of the situation, right? Which is like, it really is true. There's kind of this like Asian invisibility thing, even though like our culture is powering so much, right? So much like in this country, but also we bring it upon ourselves. We kind of do want to remain invisible, or at least culturally, we're kind of, that's the default, and I think a lot of
Yes.
people are challenging that now.
Yes. And especially as women, I think that as women, Asian women, we've been taught that by our families, to stay quiet, or to be a good girl and not talk about certain things. And I even remember, I think I told you this in that during that time was my mom, every time I would laugh out loud, my mom was like, don't laugh like that because it's not ladylike. And she would, pretty much like do the stereotypical, like hand over your mouth and, cover your hand, laugh, which actually made me laugh even more. So, because I do have like a pretty big, loud laugh. Um, and but it's so ingrained, right? It's so ingrained in how we're doing things. And, that during that time, I think I felt forced. I felt not forced by anyone, but forced for myself to actually, okay, I do have a voice. I need to speak up, and especially for those people and women who can't speak up, either because like in that tragic incident, they were killed, or what if it happened to somebody who perhaps doesn't speak English as well, and so they may not have the voice to be able to speak out and say the things that are on their hearts and minds, and in a way, and maybe even don't have much of a platform to actually be able to speak out as well, so
Yeah.
which that leads us to the conversation then you and I were having, I think in the middle of last year, about like wanting to create something to get people all together. I mean, you were really at the forefront of this summit, I mean, we've been talking about this, which is very interesting to me, is that like, you had this vision, I think, and brought all of us together, and yet I think at various times we've all kind of stepped up into different roles, and it wasn't just like, okay, Anna's taking the reins and we're just going to do whatever Anna says, and it didn't, I don't think, and you tell me if this is true, that you didn't feel like, oh, I'm pulling teeth and trying to like get all these people on board and trying to do everything either, right?
No, it's been amazing because I've never been part of such a collaborative summit before. And so it's been and in the beginning, everyone's just like, what is this? Right. But
Yeah.
then like people started opening up, and then we just got this realization, oh my gosh, we're never in summits with other Asian women, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
not really able to even refer our clients, right, or people
Mm-hmm.
to other practitioners of Asian descent. And it's like such a crazy thing. And it's something that, I think, as entrepreneurs or as Asian, like an Asian business owner, right? It's so easy to be part of other people's things. And
Mm-hmm.
then I remember, this was years ago when I was co-hosting a conference. I remember there were a few Asian women that I was like, oh, why are you here? Right? Like, what brings you to this conference? And they actually said, because I saw your photo and I had never seen. It's so crazy, right? Because now
Mm-hmm.
in the day of like Shang-Chi, we think that there is more representation, but I
Mm-hmm.
really do think that there's so much power and like individuals like you and I, professionals who really are just taking more of a bigger stance, bringing all of the experience that we have and not sugarcoating it, not ignoring it. Because, on other platforms, sometimes you can't like bring your deeper experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when
Mm-hmm.
that whole Asian hate thing, I mean, it's still going on, unfortunately, but when I
Mm-hmm.
was talking to all of these, other practitioners and they had no idea, some of them were like, well, thank you for bringing this to my attention. And some of them were like, I'm sorry, I just don't care. Basically, is like what they said. And then I kind of
Mm-hmm.
brought it on myself to like every conversation I had with a neighbor or a random person, I would bring that experience up a little bit. How are you, Anna? Well, I'm a little distraught right now. And
Mm-hmm.
because I knew that just me speaking about it, first of all, opened up something in me internally. And I think that's what the summit's doing for all of us. It's like
Yes.
magical. Yeah.
Yes.
But also it's like my neighbor she's freaking amazing, right? And she was like, oh, these women, but didn't they get killed because they were basically prostitutes, right? Or like sex workers? And I was like, oh my gosh. And she's
Mm-hmm.
like a decent, it was just like
Mm-hmm.
the stereotypes. And I'm like, no, they were like massage therapists who were moms and had kids. And they were just targeted
Mm-hmm.
because of this actual stereotype. But you don't know, like people don't know until you start talking about it. And I think that's a
Yeah.
big part of that revolution is like bringing all of this, like sometimes it's angst, right?
Yeah.
And being able to get it out. Like your laugh, like get your laugh out. It's so much
Yeah.
better. So much
Yes,
better for everyone.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, I mean, that's really powerful. I mean, was that the impetus for you wanting to have this, summit and be part of all of this? And, what was your why for doing this?
I really feel like, because you and I have worked with various different professionals, right? And I know for me, whenever I do kind of like events that are specifically catered towards Asian professionals or Asian entrepreneurs, there is always kind of like this like blanket of silence around talking
Mm,
about stuff. And I think it's just a cultural thing. You don't talk about like the real stuff that goes on or the difficult stuff or the emotional stuff. Asian mental health, especially amongst Asian women, it's not good, right? Because
mhm,
we feel like we can't talk about this stuff. And
mhm,
from a professional level, I can see this is why a lot of Asian business owners get stuck. Because
mm,
just like Asian professionals, we think if we do a really, really good job, like we're the best, I don't know, accountant or the best graphic
mm,
designer or whatever, then we'll get promoted. No, you don't. You can't secretly do a great job without a connection externally and be referenced as someone who should be promoted. And so I know for me, it's kind of been like the summit has been a lot of internal work. And also, I've been learning so much from you and all of the other ladies in there. It's like, oh my gosh, the way that you run your lives and your business, it's really deeply, it's not just about money or whatever. There is like a whole psyche of like maybe even unconsciously trying to heal others, right?
mm,
Like other people, other women. I know you really help people heal like their financial stories. And I'm like,
mhm.
that's not typical, you know? I don't think it
Right.
is. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, and then speaking of that, like, kind of keeping quiet and everything, like, how have you felt during this time? Because, this was something that I've talked to Shane and to Dr. Natasha about this week is that, like, we've all had a lot of personal things come up for us in the last 6 months that we've been planning this summit, and some of it may have to do with our businesses, but most of it was just personal, really challenging moments in our personal lives, and then it's been amazing because we've also been so supportive of one another in that way and been able to give each other that space to cry if we needed to or to just let it out. So what have you seen in your life? And then, personally, how have you been dealing with it? And also, like, what have you learned, during these last 6 months?
Yeah. I think it's amazing how much it has just been a healing space. Like I watch myself show up during our calls and all the brainstorming, and I can find like there's a part of me that's like constantly impatient, right? It's like, let's just do this, guys. We don't have to go through every single word, do we? Right? Do we have to be that inclusive? Hey, Gary. Hey, Shang. Right? But it's like
Yeah.
having a place where it's non-judgmental and people come from this place of compassion, it really brings out a different quality. It brings out, I think, for me at least, like a different level of creativity. And the fact that, when we say things and it's like, like just like how we run our businesses, or sometimes we feel a lot of pressure to produce or perform, and we all just get it. There's something really healing in that, So like maybe someone else spoke about it. I didn't speak about it. It was so
Mm-hmm.
healing just to hear someone say it. And I hope that this summit is healing for others. But like, Katie, what was it
Mm-hmm.
for you? Like, what have you gotten from just like our time putting it together?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it really was just really interesting that not one person needed to say, like, here's what we're doing and here's how we need to do it. And, giving out instructions and, because usually in a group, that's what happens, right? Like, there's usually one person kind of leading things and driving it. And yet that wasn't the case for the six of us. There wasn't one person who drove this at all. And in fact, it just felt like where we could step up, we all did. And then where we felt like we didn't know that much, it was okay too. And it was okay to actually just admit, like, yeah, I don't know how to do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
then
we
to
had some
ask those questions.
tragedies. We had some tragedies. We had a lot of mental health stuff come up for everybody at some point,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
it's like, oh my gosh, I'm actually going through the same thing, right? Like
Yes.
I've been feeling depressed for the past few weeks and I don't know why. And it's like, but something about being able to come back to the group
Yes.
was really powerful, like really healing.
Yes. I agree. And then there was one moment I remember, like we were talking about kind of breaking down even costs of, like, who we're hiring to help us. And and being a money coach is actually interesting because I guess I think about it from a different perspective, right? And then somebody else brought up, like, well, I'm kind of tired of, like, just doing stuff for free. I'm tired of not getting kind of a little bit of a value or getting something for the work I'm putting in. And that made me pause. Like, it really made me pause and start to think about all of it, because I think that I had come from such a different perspective. And when that was brought up, and then others were chiming in and saying, yeah, I totally agree. I really need to, actually make some money, or, I don't know if I can even contribute to certain things. I'm like, these are some of those conversations that I think, like, most of us don't have, right? Or we're afraid of having. We may be saying to ourselves, like, well, don't bring it up because then maybe these other ladies don't want to work with me or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What's the Asian money thing? Like, if we just could generalize, what's the Asian thing around money? What would you say it is?
I would say, well, Asians place quite a heavy emphasis on money. And in some ways, it's actually okay and good, but then in a lot of ways, it's actually pretty toxic and harmful, right? Because, yeah, like, I had a grandmother, and this is part of my money story, is that I had a grandmother on my dad's side who would always say things like, oh, none of you are getting my money when I die. Like, I'm going to, cash it out and be buried with it. And that was, it's somewhat funny, but then her reality, the way she acted in life, was really about that, was really more like, everyone is out to get my money. That's one of her ways of being in the world. And then two, I'm going to be suspicious of everybody, and because that's not what, I don't want you to get any close to me, so that, because I think all you're doing is coming after me for my money, right?
I would say that is an Asian thing. Is like even when I
Yeah.
meet people, they're like, what do
Mm-hmm.
you want? Like, or who is this? How can
Mm-hmm.
they help me? So I definitely get a little bit of that.
Yeah, and so that kind of made me almost go in the opposite direction for for my younger years, like all throughout my teens and in my 20s, like anytime I made money, I was very conscious of like not keeping it in a way, like, or even unconsciously not keeping it. You know, it was like as
Right.
soon as it came in, I was ready to spend it. Like back in college, I would take cabs everywhere. I was living in New York City and I was taking cabs everywhere. I mean, what college student does that? And then whenever I was at a bar with friends, I would pay for people's drinks. I was just like, whatever I had, it's yours because I don't care about it. I don't want to be like my grandmother, so I'm just going to give it away, you know? And not until I started to look at that and be like, oh, well, then I'm not taking care of myself, right? And I am actually like, there was a moment I remember there was a homeless guy on the streets, and I would give him money almost every day. I would see him every day, right? And then there was this one day I couldn't quite make it with my tuition because my parents were not paying for my college education, actually. And so I was doing it. I had 3 jobs while I was in school, and I also had a scholarship, but then there was also student loans. And there was one day I felt like, oh my gosh, like what am I going to do this next semester? And I was pretty down about it, you know, and I was walking along, and the same homeless guy was like asking for money. I gave him money. Then I went to some place, maybe I went to class, and I came back, and that same homeless person asked me for money again, as if I had not given him money. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, like, first of all, I'm just another person to him. He like doesn't even recognize me as, you know, the person who gives him money like every single day.
Wow.
And then
Yeah.
2, I'm not taking care of myself because here I am like kind of freaking out that I didn't have my tuition for next semester. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was giving him money. And then here he was like asking me for more, you know? So that's when I was like, okay, I need to figure out something different. Like I can't just give it all away, you know? And it still took me a
Mhm.
while longer to really figure things out. But you know, eventually I did, and that was transformative because we definitely need to take care of ourselves, you know, before we can actually take care of somebody else. I mean, it's the thing that everybody talks about, you know, like getting on a plane and putting on your own mask before you even put it on your child's face, right? Because even though it seems illogical, it seems like, oh, that's selfish. Like, I need to put the mask on my child. But if you run out of oxygen before or while you're struggling to put the mask on your
Yeah.
child, then, you know, then that
Does the guilt ever
doesn't
go
benefit.
away, you think? Does the guilt go away? Like, so it's like, oh, I could pay for everyone's lunch. And let's say everyone's helping me out in some way. And I kind of feel like I need to pay for everyone's lunch. Or like, like I know I should put my mask on first, but like my grandma's, like, so do you think the guilt ever goes away?
Um, yes, yes. I mean, it can be, so it's 2 things, right? Because it's like, well, where is that guilt coming from, right? Like, is it coming from a place of like, I'm not enough, I'm not giving enough, or I owe somebody something, you know, because if that's the case, then you kind of have to start to look at yourself and understand what your worth is, because I bet you anything your worth isn't that, right? Because on the other side of my family, my mom's side, my grandmother on that side, who I actually lost last year during this time, like she was so generous. Like she was like the opposite of my other grandmother. And I don't think she ever made me feel like I owed her anything and she wasn't suspicious. You know, she actually gave me I think she gave me $1,000 to buy my first car. Um,
Awesome.
yeah. And so I think that like we must take a look at that, you know, and say like, where is that coming from, right? Is it coming from a place of genuine, like I have the money and I really, really want to help my parents out or my grandparents out and help that? Or is it coming from a place of like, I should be doing that because that's what a good Asian daughter does, right? I mean,
Yeah.
because there is that for sure. And yet I know that it's not it's not always expected because, like I was telling you about my grandmother, like she was living off of Social Security and yet she saved her money and she was giving her money to, she gave me $1,000 for my first car. She was giving money to her kids whenever they needed it. And she, yeah, she had already paid off her funeral arrangements. So no one had to worry
Yeah.
about it or take care of it, which that to me is like very unusual. Like that's
Yeah.
not a very typical Asian thing to do. Like my own parents would don't even have that taken care of. Like they don't even want to talk about
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, the
That's,
inevitable. Yeah.
yeah, that's
So for
another conversation.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, well, what about you? Like for you, does the guilt kind of like get in the way of like how you feel about things? Like, hi, Patrice.
Patrice, hello. I
Hmm.
think it's for me, it's important to realize that for me, like I have all of the extremes, right? So kind of like you had the two extreme grandmothers, one who was
Hmm.
super generous and just kind of gave everything, right? But also like seems like she had clear boundaries and good savings, and the other one that was like, this is mine, right? So
Hmm.
like I feel like I have those extremes where it's like I do feel like honoring people, and it's like a big it's a pay for everything, like not
Hmm.
just pay for like a little, what, like pay for everybody, like all of the
Hmm.
people at the table. And because there's just like a cultural thing there, and I think it just feels wrong not doing it. But then
Hmm.
also there's a part of me that's like, I've been giving way too much, right? And sometimes it's not reciprocated, sometimes it's even taken for granted. And so
Hmm.
like I do have these different, I guess, money personalities. And I'll be honest with you, I still feel uncomfortable because I do want to pay for like my friends to have lunch or something, but
Hmm.
it's probably not the most financially responsible thing. And then when I kind of feel into it energetically, it's probably not the best thing for the relationship at that time. And I know for
Hmm.
me, when I'm doing coaching back in the day, I used to just give, 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 give. And it wasn't until I realized, oh, so this is my own problem, and it's actually affecting their results in terms of
Hmm.
my clients. Because if
Hmm.
I'm over giving, they just kind of have this like expectation, and then they're doing less of the work, or they feel like
Yeah.
they're, like I'm going to take care of it for them. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
this is so destructive. And so
Yeah.
I'll do it. I don't know if this is bad, but for like the other person, it's easier, right? For me to like, okay, not going to overgive, going to have clear boundaries. That almost helped me see that toxic behavior that you said,
Hmm.
because otherwise I could just be in my emotions and be like, okay, I'm going to pay for this.
Hmm.
I'll take care of it. Right. I'll go into debt. It's fine. Yeah. Hey,
Hmm.
hey, Johnny.
Yeah. Yeah, and it also seems to when we tend to like overdo it or take care of things for everybody else, it's really giving a sense that they can't do it for themselves, right? Like
Yeah.
that, that we're almost even though we're not consciously saying like you can't do it yourself, but in a way, that is the message, when we actually do that, So instead, it's like, so I think it's so important for us to just really come from that place of like resourcefulness and that everybody, right? Everybody is resourceful. Everyone is creative. Everyone is whole. And we're just sort of a vessel, to actually be able to guide and create some different breakthroughs too, as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Tell me what you think about this. I feel like Asians have a tendency to like sacrifice their own happiness and maybe even their health for money. And I know this is kind of like a very American thing
Mm,
too, but growing
mm,
up, it was just like working class immigrant family. They always sacrifice their happiness and their health and, like their everything to earn money. And so like
mm,
I don't know, and even like when I see now, like even with my cousins and people who, I mean, they make good money, like they're not working like minimum wage or whatever. They're like making pretty good money, but it's kind of like this like, well, but I can't, like necessarily do this vacation, or like I need to like
mm.
get the thing that's just like more of what I can afford. And I understand that there's probably like some financial sense to that, but I feel like there's also a little bit of like sacrificial energy in there. I don't
Well,
know.
I mean, I've seen this whether you're Asian or not Asian, actually. I mean, a lot of it is immigrant mentality for
True.
sure. Yeah. And, I've had so many of these conversations with my clients because I serve a lot of creative types of people. And so there has been a lot of discussion lately too that I've had with clients about like that they don't truly believe that they can make money doing what they love, and the only way they can make money is doing something terrible or difficult, or or just things that they like they believe will make money, right? Like being an accountant or working in a warehouse or and
Yeah.
then the things that light them up, like if they want to be a theater actor or a musician or be a singer or writer, that they're like, oh, those are just my hobbies, because I don't think, like, I want to make money doing what I love and I want to make money doing all those things, but I don't really believe that that's the case, right? And some of it goes back into farther, like back into generational things. I was just talking to a client last week where his family were indentured servants to Fiji, from India to Fiji. And that mentality has carried on generation after generation because they consistently feel like money is like, you know, it's an owed thing, right? Like we owe money, so now we have to work it off, to be able to make things work. And so like for him, he was like, who am I to like quit my corporate job and be a theater actor and director, right? Because
Yeah.
and so that sense of like guilt and family stuff like keeps him stuck in a place where you know that's just a hobby and that's just a pipe dream. Being a theater actor and director is just a pipe dream, at this point, because all he could feel in his being, right? And even what he heard, because even his own dad used to complain all the time, like, I hate my job.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that is something that is a challenge, and something that we actually are going to talk about. I mean, that's one of my that is my summit talk, is going to be around like, how do we start to shift these cultural expectations, the generational kind of traumas too, right? That we've been creating in our being throughout all of these generations, and then how do we release that so that we can actually not just want to make money from doing what we love, but be able to make money doing what we love.
Oh, yeah, that's so perfect. That's so
Mm-hmm.
perfect. And my workshop aligns so well with yours, of course, because it's part of the
Mm-hmm.
summit.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you even know who you are, what you want sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because sometimes trauma gets in the way. And so I love your clients who are like, I want to do this, but I don't know if I can do it. And sometimes people are like, who am I? What can I
Yeah.
even do? Or also like they might have an idea, but it's like so many layers of like those stories, those narratives that we kind of confuse ourselves, which is just a form of self-sabotage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like, okay, well, I'll figure it out later, or when I get my bonus, I'll leave my job or whatever. But it's actually just layers of stories and trauma that keep
Mm-hmm.
us from really being able to, oh, I could actually, if I decided to, because I'm so powerful, I could decide to change my career and make it work. Because I
Yeah.
guarantee you, all of your clients, everyone, like you have a history in your life of making stuff work for you, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just like, can you be brave enough to even see what you really want and believe in it? That is what I think this summit is really going to help people with, is like that clarity of owning their voice, recognizing the stuff that's been holding them back, and then really just like make a run for it, right? Like do it. You have YOLO,
Mm-hmm.
really.
Yes, absolutely. And this is something that's always fascinated me, right? Because ever since I've met you, it's so powerful to hear you talking about um, things that are in the shadows, right? Like you wrote a book called Shadow Magic, right? And um, because I think that And this is something that I think Asians are very good at, is like keeping things in the shadow, right? Like we have these family traumas and stories, and yet they're kind of whispered, and you sort of know some of the details. Like I remember there's a story. I mean, one of the reasons I do what I do is because of one of the women in my family who was in an abusive relationship, and she had to stay in it in order to make ends meet for herself and her daughter. And I remember a long time ago talking to my mom about like wanting to write that story and to put it out there, right? And this was way before I was a coach. It was just, I think back when I was a TV producer. And my mom said to me, who wants to hear about that or to know anything about that? That is just a sad story that no one wants to, no one would relate to it too.
Because we think it happens only to us or to our family, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and so when you hear about that, like, I'm sure you've heard so many times, like in Asian families, there are these like kind of secrets and shadows and other kinds of things. Like, do like, what do you believe around that? Like being able to release some of those,
Yeah.
that part of our lives, right? Because it does feel a little bit like, should I divulge secrets? Should I even be talking about this stuff? Like I get nervous sometimes too. I'm like, I'm glad my mom's not really on Instagram that much.
Exactly. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I haven't even like my parents know about the book, but they haven't like read it, and I'm not like pushing them to read it because there are some personal stories in there, and it was very scary to write. And the thing about our shadows is until we at least accept them, even if we don't love them, because there's a lot of issues of mental health, right? And a lot of families in period, but definitely in a lot of Asian families and kind of like Asian specific experiences, there's a lot of mental health issues that no one talks about because it's like a very taboo thing. And here's the thing, we can choose to ignore it where it then really affects us, or we can choose to really just be honest about it and then like, oh, I can actually like do something about it. And so the thing about shadows is like it affects us. It's actually the thing that controls our life, the income that we make, our relationships, our career, and how successful we are. So when I realized that, I was like, oh my gosh, my whole life is actually controlled by my shadows and not my conscious logical decisions. And you learn this in economics too, right? People don't really spend logically. Otherwise, people wouldn't gamble, and do like crazy stuff like that.
Right.
People spend emotionally. And
Yes.
I'm telling you, like our shadows, and we also have a collective shadow, right? So there's like a collective Chinese shadow. There's like a collective Taiwanese shadow. There's like a collective Korean, and there's a collective Asian American shadow. All these things affect us because we are all energy. And so the more that we can just be clear around, okay, yeah, so there's a legacy of this in my family, and it's not all bad. Sometimes it's like a lot of people with a lot of courage, a lot of people who can like really create and make do with like very little. Like that mentality, entrepreneurial mentality is huge, right? In Asian communities, that family, like sense of bonding is very huge. Like those are really good things. But it's the tough things that we don't want to look at that controls our relationships, controls our life. So those are the most important things to look at. The one of the biggest things that people said from reading Shadow Magic is like they didn't realize how much their business was controlled by their shadow, being afraid of being visible, really thinking that if they put their stuff out there, it would get copied, right? And I hear this all the time from clients, right? And I still feel this even for myself, even having doing some work, but I'm so aware of it now that it's kind of like a separate operating system. And I've developed this other operating system, which is much more clear. Like I call it the executive self, but sometimes people call it just kind of like your higher self or your more aligned self. That's where we want to be. And I think the beautiful part of having all of our stories in the root of revolution is people are going to wait. Oh my gosh, that's me too. Oh, I didn't even realize that was happening. Oh my gosh, Katie mentioned this thing and I never realized that I secretly wanted to be a singer, right? Or a graphic design artist, but my parents said I couldn't be an artist, right? My little sister, I'm going to give her a big shout out. Her Instagram's Tsui, Tsui_Amy, I think. She's a tattoo artist. And she went to like a liberal art school, like a really, really good one, studying art. Oh my gosh. is that typical? No. But she just like was like, this is what I want to do. And then she's like, oh, and then I'm going to be a tattoo artist. And my parents were like, okay, at least that's a job, right? But she's thriving now and she's like able to develop her own style and she's able to really make it work for her. It wasn't always easy, right? But just like you said, like if you really want to do something like this, I think this summit is really going to help you awaken to the parts of you that keep you from
Mm.
doing it. And then also give you the sense of like, oh, wow, I can actually do it. I can actually make a plan, right? And it's realistic for me because look at all of these other people doing their passions in their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, if you're, if you felt in any way that, what we just talked about resonates with you, I really encourage you to come join us, on the summit. It's going to be 3 days. Like, we're going to have incredible training, conversations, discussions. And like I've been saying all this week too, with everybody that I've been going live with, it's like, it's not about us like teaching you. It's really about us all coming together to feel seen and heard and understood and to have compassion for each other's stories and experiences and to learn from each other and collaborate and build upon this, so that we can all do this together. Yeah. Oh, that's so great, Carol. I'm excited you're joining us. Yeah. Because
Yay.
I mean, it's just, I feel so just fortunate to have, to know you and to have met you in Sicily in 2019, and then to also be part of the summit with all these incredible, incredible women. Everyone from Dr. Natasha to Shang Her and to Meike Sang and Deepshika Saram. It's just been an amazing journey that we've been on so far, and we're now so excited to like open that door, right? And open the doors to say like, where else can we take this? What else? What are the other conversations that need to happen and that we can continue to help each other to build on all of it. So yeah.
Yeah. Come join us, everyone. It's going to be a lot
Yes.
of fun. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Any last words, Anna?
I think there's a shift happening. But at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of heaviness around people that we need to recognize. We want to go with like life as usual, but because of the pandemic and all of the other, spillover effects, we're really at a point where our internal world is like screaming at us. And if anyone here feels confused, if they feel even like a little depressed or disconnected, right? Like it's normal. And that's why it's even more important to come together and really like do the healing so you could just like feel yourself again,
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining me today on IG. And we'll be seeing everyone there, hopefully.
Thanks for having me, Katie. See you soon.
Yeah, yeah. Follow Anna on her Instagram, and then I'm sure both of us have links in our bios for it.
Hmm. Awesome.
Yeah.
Carol, share with your friends. That's awesome.
Oh, thank you, Carol. All right. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.